author of 10 books, including Crossing the Waters, Following Jesus Through the Storms, the Fish, the Doubt, and the Seas, forthcoming from NAV Press in October. She writes for Christianity Today, Books and Culture, In Touch magazine, and others. Her articles have won several Evangelical Press Awards as well as the William Wilberforce Award. She loves speaking and teaching around the country, but her favorite week of the year is the week of the Harvester Island Wilderness Workshop, a writing workshop that she founded on her fish camp island in Alaska, where she lives with her family. Thank you very much, Leslie, for joining us today.
Hey, Brian. It's great to be with you on this special day.
So, as you know, Mr. Buechner will be soon turning 90 years old. Is there anything you'd like to wish him on this great milestone?
Absolutely. So, Mr. Buechner, I wish you a glad, happy birthday month. And it must be a month, because when you're 90, you should definitely take the whole month. And I have something for you. I'm going to send you some of my own canned salmon so that you will make it all the way to 100, because salmon does that.
That's great, Leslie. I'm sure he'll really appreciate hearing from you, and I'm sure he'll enjoy the salmon very much. So next, can you tell me what most attracts you to Mr. Buechner's writing?
Wow. You know, I was first introduced to Mr. Buechner's work in college, and I was at a Christian college, a conservative Christian college, and I read Telling the Truth and then The Alphabet of Grace, and I was hooked right from the start. At this college, and I think this is very, very typical of the time, faith and imagination were seen as antithetical to one another. You know, faith is, you know, all things related to God, and therefore, you know, absolute, rock solid, immovable. And imagination is something that's just, you know, human, sort of made up, untestable, and subjective, and therefore suspect. And Buechner, Mr. Buechner, rescued me from this really impossible and wrong-headed divide. So that's just to start with.
That was great. Thank you. Would you say that Mr. Buechner has had any influence on your own writing career?
Oh, absolutely. Just to give a concrete example, 20 years ago, I had a collection of essays set on my island in Alaska, and my agent told me, "You're not in these essays. They're all about place. There's nothing here about you." And that was my plan. I never wanted to write about myself. I didn't want to write about my life. I wanted to write, you know, about the outer landscape and the seascape, because I live in this incredible place. But then there was Mr. Buechner on my shoulder, and there was this quote, which maybe is his most famous quote, but and I know it will be familiar to many. Listen to your life. See it for the fathomless mystery that it is, in the boredom and pain of it, no less than in the excitement and gladness. Touch, taste, smell your way to the holy and hidden heart of it, because in the last analysis, all moments are key moments, and life itself is grace. And that quote really gave me permission, actually more than permission, it was sort of a command, you know, to consider my life worthy of attention. I grew up in a setting of secrets. You know, everything is a secret, and you don't call attention to yourself. You just plow ahead, you know, into your life without looking back. But Mr. Buechner called me, though he's called thousands of others I know, into this holy work of discovering God in all the pockets and the events and even the silences in our lives. And Buechner is so fearless in his exploration of those things. There's this moment, again, I think it's quite well known in The Alphabet of Grace, when he's searching, you know, seeking for God, and all he hears is the clack of two branches, you know, hitting one another in the wind. And in truth, sometimes that's all you get. but it's so much more than you think. You know, he revealed to me, really modeled for me what can happen when a heart and a pen chases after God.
Well, those are wonderful examples, Leslie. Thank you. You mentioned a couple of his different books. Which of his many books would you say has meant the most to you?
I would say the first one that I read was Telling the Truth, and that was very influential in changing how I thought about the gospel. You know, the gospels as narratives, as stories. And then second, I would say probably Godric. Godric is he's so incredibly earthy, you know, shockingly so at times. But I think he really personifies Buechner's belief that God's grace is incarnate in both the profound and the profane. And Godric is clearly both. And the thing is, we are too.
Yes, that's clearly a theme that's gone throughout his books. So I know that's resonated with many people. Are there any particular pieces of your own work that you would say have been especially inspired by Mr. Buechner's?
Yeah, yeah. That first memoir, Surviving the Island of Grace, that was my first turn toward memoir, and I would credit Mr. Buechner with that. But the book I just finished, like 3 days ago, just finished, and thank you for introducing it. It's called Crossing the Waters, Following Jesus Through the Storms, the Fish, the Doubt, and the Seas. And in that book, I follow the journey of the disciples as they follow Jesus, and I look through the eyes of the fishermen disciples, because that's what my family does. We are fishermen in Alaska. And there's this kind of melding of my experience together with the disciples' experience. And there it is again, that merging of faith and imagination. And you know, it's not just an artistic impulse. I think this is our life's work. And, you know, we've always heard, you know, from the scriptures, faith without works is dead. But I want to add to that, you know, courtesy of Mr. Buechner, and say faith without imagination is dead. And I would never have dared to do this book without Mr. Buechner's examples. And I think most of all, it's his affirmation of the human experience, of the limitations and the doubt that aren't just an inevitable part of our lives, but a necessary part of our lives. And rather than running from them, why not bring mind and heart and pen to them and see what can be found? And that's just what I've done in this most recent book.
Well, I would say that you've gleaned a great deal of insight from Mr. Buechner's work, just from what you were saying, and even the title of that book, you know, resonates with many of the things he wrote too. So it's really wonderful to hear. Mm-hmm. So, more broadly speaking, what influence would you say that Mr. Buechner has had on Christianity or the world at large?
For generations, and that's the word I always use when I don't know how long that is. For a long time, you know, we've created this ugly false divide between art over here and faith over here, you know, with a solid line drawn between the two. And so here we are huddled under our faith tent, you know, creating work that only Christians will read, using Christian language, proclaiming the gospel, which is what we're supposed to do. That's good. But we're speaking in such narrow terms and such almost anti-human terms, and with such certainty, that I think we lose the possibility, we have lost the possibility of truly proclaiming the gospel. And we've denied the wholeness and hugeness and beauty, you know, of this God-made life. So here comes Frederick Buechner, you know, onto this scene, and he sets his tent up right where it belongs, you know, right on that line, which doesn't mean that he's straddling two worlds, like, okay, a little bit of faith, a little bit of art, you know, we're going to put it together, kind of make everybody happy. I don't mean it like that. It's not a middle position. It's not a compromise, not at all, because truly the life of faith is the life of beauty and art and fearless exploration of all things made, of all things seen and unseen. And Mr. Buechner doesn't just set up a third tent. I would say he tears down the other two tents and shows us it's all one tent. It's all one life.
That's really wonderful. Thank you again, Leslie. I realize that this next question is pretty difficult, but if you were to sum up Fred in a few words, what would you say?
Oh dear, I can't. This is what I want to say though. Mr. Buechner, and actually I want to call him Sir Frederick Buechner because I want to knight him. And I'm going to confer knighthood on him with my can of salmon. Okay, there we go. And I just want to say to you, Mr. Buechner, thank you for listening. Thank you for opening the holy and hidden heart of life to so many of us. Because you're right, all moments are key moments. This moment right now. And life itself is grace.
Well, thank you so much, Leslie. Is there anything else that you'd like to pass along before we conclude?
No, that's the whole world in a cup, as Mr. Buechner would say.
Well, thank you so much. I know that he'll really appreciate hearing all these wonderful things that you've had to say and the insights that you've portrayed coming from his work and your work. So I know he will greatly appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much. It's just a great privilege to be able to send him this message.